The first book that we ever published as the Center for Political Innovation was this book, The Green Book, written by Muammar Gaddafi, the leader of Libya. From 1969, when the revolution happened and the king who was imposed on Libya by the British Empire was overthrown, to 2011, when NATO bombs destroyed Libya, Libya was a socialist country. It was not a Marxist country. It was a socialist country. And the ideology that the Libyan government, led by Colonel Muammar Gaddafi, followed was spelled out in this book, The Green Book. And under Muammar Gaddafi's leadership, Libya had the highest life expectancy on the African continent. They also built the world's largest irrigation system. They wiped out unemployment entirely. They wiped out illiteracy entirely. They provided a living standard that was very, very high. They took control of the oil resources of Libya, and they utilized the oil resources of Libya to build a strong, prosperous economy. And Libya very much used its wealth to aid other anti-colonial struggles around the world. Libya gave funding and support to Nelson Mandela and the struggle to defeat apartheid in South Africa. Libya, under Gaddafi's leadership, supported the Black Panthers in the United States, and it supported the IRA and the Irish freedom struggle. And Gaddafi pivoted away from the Arab world, and he announced he was an African president rather than an Arab president. And he enacted a policy that any African who came to Libya would be given a job. And people from all across the African continent went to Libya because they would be immediately employed by the Libyan government. Every family in Libya, when they got married, they received a $20,000 marriage bonus to help them start a family. And the policies in Libya of Islamic socialism were very beneficial to the Libyan people. They had a very high life expectancy, very high living standards, very high rate of literacy, very, prosperous economy compared to the rest of the continent. In addition to that, they were beneficial to many people throughout the world who were fighting for their national liberation. The Palestinians received a huge amount of support from Muammar Gaddafi. The people of Ireland, the people of southern African countries, not just South Africa, but also Mozambique and Namibia and Zimbabwe and Angola, they received support from Gaddafi. Gaddafi was a friend of those in the world that are struggling against imperialism, against the rule of the world by big banks and corporations. And Gaddafi had come to power in an anti-imperialist struggle. It was the oil workers who went on strike. Libya has a huge amount of oil, but the people of Libya were very, very poor because that oil was under the control of British Petroleum and British corporations. And they lived under a king that was a puppet of the British Empire and the British corporations. So the oil workers went on strike, and then the rest of the population poured into the streets to support them. And then Gaddafi and his group of patriotic officers, they led a military coup, and they announced that they were toppling the current government and they were going to move towards socialism. And then there was widespread debate all throughout Libya. They created these communal councils all over Libya to debate what kind of country it would be and how they would move ahead. And eventually, they adopted their own specific interpretation of socialism that was different than Marxism, Leninism, and communism, was different than Baathism and Arab socialism. It was called Islamic socialism. And you can read all about it in the Green Book. And the reason that the first book we ever published with the Center for Political Innovation was the Green Book was because the destruction of Libya by Barack Hussein Obama and Hillary Rodham Clinton, that was a pivotal moment in what led to the creation of our organization, the Center for Political Innovation. Why? Because the year of 2011, that was the first year I lived in New York City. I moved to New York City on December 30th, 2010. I came to this city on a Greyhound bus with almost nothing, and I became a volunteer and eventually a staffer with Ramsey Clark, the former U.S. Attorney General. Ramsey Clark was the U.S. Attorney General under Lyndon Johnson. He later became a big opponent of the International Criminal Court, an anti-imperialist. He stood with the people of Serbia and was represented Slobodan Milosevic in The Hague. He denounced many U.S. wars, and he was Saddam Hussein's lawyer and eventually quit in protest because of the trial in Iraq was not fair. Ramsey Clark was a dynamic individual who really saw the evils of imperialism. And despite the fact that he had once been the U.S. Attorney General, he had been part of the Kennedy generation, he'd supported the civil rights movement, he wanted to hold back the FBI and COINTELPRO. And after he left Washington, D.C., and left the Department of Justice, he became an anti-imperialist activist his entire life. And I worked with Ramsey Clark. And in 2011, you'll remember what happened was the Arab Spring happened. And all over social media, there was propaganda being spread throughout social media urging people to revolt, rise up, and overthrow the government. And it was mainly directed at Arab countries. And it started in Tunisia, and it spread to Egypt, and many Arab countries. People were being inspired to rise up against the government. We now know that this was intentionally planned and staged by the Hillary Clinton State Department. It was essentially an effort. They realized how bad the economy was. They realized there was a lot of unrest in the Arab world. And so rather than have some kind of revolution that they couldn't control, like the Islamic Revolution of Iran, they decided to have a revolution on their own terms. And so Al Jazeera, which is the TV network based in Qatar, which is funded by the Qatari monarchy as well as Turkey. Al Jazeera, which puts forward the perspective of the Muslim Brotherhood, the kind of westernized secularist, or not secularist, but the westernized Islamist view, as well as Twitter and Facebook and mainstream media in the West. They all urged the people of the Middle Eastern countries to rise up against their governments. And at the time, many leftists, including myself, I was in a communist group at the time, we were under the impression that this was a good thing. We thought this was the people of the Middle East fighting for their rights. And at the same time in the United States, there was the protests in Wisconsin in support of the labor unions and the right to have a labor union. And so, we'd say fight like an Egyptian. And, it was a whole thing. We thought that the Arab Spring was good. It was not. And arguably it made things worse in almost every country. Yemen is kind of the exception because you can see the rise of an anti-imperialist movement in Yemen. But every other country where we saw during those years, you saw an uprising. Things got worse. Egypt is far worse off, no question about it. Syria is far worse off. Tunisia is not any better off. Many of the countries that had revolutions during the Arab Spring didn't really benefit. But Barack Obama was cheering for those revolutions. CNN and Al Jazeera and MSNBC were cheering for those revolutions. And many people were very confused because these revolutions had a leftist edge to them, right? It was people protesting in the streets, but the issues they raised were always very, very vague, right? Issues like corruption. What is corruption? It can be anything you want. Calls for democracy. Again, what does democracy mean? Just means the rule of the people. It's a vaguely understood concept. There's a lot of debate about what is really democratic, and that these kind of vague uprisings were happening. And of course, we at the International Action Center back in those days, we knew something was off when the protests against the Libyan government were being boosted. And so we opposed, we did not support the uprisings in Libya against the Libyan government. And those uprisings were pretty well defeated by Gaddafi. But then Barack Hussein Obama announced that the USA was going to unleash cruise missiles and bomb Libya in order to support the so-called revolution against Gaddafi. And so the United States and the NATO countries, they started bombing Libya. And with the support of the richest countries in the world and their cruise missiles, and we later found out the United States had been arming and sending weapons to these anti-Libyan, anti-Gaddafi fighters. With that support, the Libyan government did fall. Now, we know one of the people who was involved in the armed struggle against Gaddafi, the violent U.S.-backed attempt to overthrow Gaddafi. He was the individual who bombed the Manchester concert. Right? If you look, these are facts. These are facts. The individual who blew up the concert in Manchester, he was a Libyan who had gone and fought against Gaddafi with the support of the British government, with the support of the American government. And he was a ruthless terrorist. And he went back to Manchester in London and he carried out a horrendous bombing. The British government had funded Islamic extremists against Gaddafi because Gaddafi was a secular leader. And they overthrew the government, and then they continued to do their terrorism. And many of the forces that eventually became ISIS originated in Libya. And that the main argument against Gaddafi by the Islamic forces that were fighting against him, their main beef with Gaddafi was that he was not an Islamist, right? That he was secular. How dare he, right? That he was not a conservative Muslim. He was not creating an Islamic state in Libya. And they violently overthrew him. And after Gaddafi's death, things in Libya have utterly deteriorated. And I mean, it's gotten so bad, people drown in the Mediterranean trying to flee the country on rafts. There's open air slave markets. It's just an absolute disaster what has happened in Libya since the 2011 bombing. But the worst part of the 2011 bombing was that because Barack Obama was the president, and because of the fact that the protests against Gaddafi were framed in this leftist way, there was barely any opposition. The Nation of Islam, led by Minister Farrakhan, they had protests in support of Gaddafi and against the bombing of Libya. Cynthia McKinney, the U.S. Congresswoman, who is my friend, who I met most recently in Russia, where we were election observers together, she went to Libya, to support Gaddafi. And Ramsey Clark, who I worked with, he went to Libya, and there was a meeting at the Riverside Church, a meeting opposing the bombing of Libya. But overall, the American government presided over the destruction of the most prosperous country on the African continent. And I was really outraged by how little my organization did to support Gaddafi, right? It was one thing. Thank goodness we opposed the bombing. Thank goodness we didn't support the revolution like most of the communist and leftist groups did at the time. But we did very, very little. We had a rally at Riverside Church. We went to the rally that Nation of Islam did. We had a couple little tiny protests where we stood around with signs, but very, very little was done. And the most prosperous country on the African continent was bombed and destroyed by U.S. imperialism and by Wall Street. And why did they destroy Libya? Because Libya had broken free. Libya had broken out of the domination of globalism, imperialism. And what was interesting was Alex Jones was a big supporter of Libya at the time it was being bombed and attacked. And he talked about how Gaddafi had been creating an independent African bank, trying to set up an independent African currency for the African people. And Alex Jones had very, very good coverage of what was happening there. And he spent time in Libya with Cynthia McKinney. And one of the things that Alex Jones, as a conservative and as a gun owner, pointed out was Gaddafi was so popular and had so much support among the population that he had these trucks driving around full of guns, just handing them out to anybody who wanted them. Why? Because he was so confident the people who took the guns would point them in the right direction. And Alex Jones is watching this. He's like, the people of Libya clearly support Gaddafi. Gaddafi gave them running water. Gaddafi gave them education. Gaddafi gave them housing and healthcare. They clearly support him, and they don't support the people fighting against him, most of whom are not Libyan, most of whom are insurgents. And one of the main things that the new government of Libya did when they took control of cities like Benghazi is they lynched the dark-skinned Africans. They were dark-skinned Africans who had come to Libya to get employment. They were like guest workers. And the wealthiest Libyans, some of the wealthiest Libyans, resented this. And some of them were very conservative Islamists. They didn't like that these Libyans were not, these Africans were Christians rather than Muslims. And so the New York Times even ran an article about how one of the main things they would do is they would lynch dark-skinned Africans and hang their bodies publicly. It was just like here in the U.S. South when they lynched black people. They would hang them and then light their bodies on fire as a display, as a threat of violence. I mean, it was horrendous, right? Barack Obama brought down the most prosperous country on the African continent, brought back modern-day slave markets to that country, brought lynching to that country. I mean, it was utterly horrendous what was done. And the outrage was that not enough was done to oppose it. Not enough was done to oppose it. I went to Washington, D.C., where the Answer Coalition had protests, had some demonstrations at the White House. And I was there. I went to Riverside Church and spoke at some meetings with Ramsey Clark and with some other people. I mean, but not enough was done to oppose the bombing of Libya. And I was in Zuccotti Park, the Occupy Wall Street Park, when Gaddafi died. I was there the day Gaddafi died, and what I noticed was that there was a big gap because most of the people in the park were not happy about Gaddafi being killed. Most of the people in the park were people who had joined the Occupy Wall Street movement because they were alienated by the American government. They didn't trust mainstream media, and they were angry at the system. And many of them were into conspiracy theories. Many of them were libertarians, and they thought Gaddafi must be a good guy because he was trying to create an independent African currency, because he was setting up an independent African bank, because he was fighting against Wall Street and against imperialism. So there was a lot of sympathy for Gaddafi among most Occupy Wall Street activists. But who didn't sympathize with Gaddafi? Well, the people who didn't sympathize with Gaddafi were the professional left. Right, the Trotskyites that were there with their fancy book tables, selling their newspapers, the people that I used to call beautiful occupiers who were getting paid to be there by some big fancy NGO, probably funded by George Soros. They all celebrated the death of Gaddafi because they saw Gaddafi as just the same as as what they identified the Occupy Wall Street movement with the protests against Gaddafi. That's really what it got down to. They felt that the protests against Muammar Gaddafi and the protests of Occupy Wall Street were part of a similar thing. It was this global Occupy Wall Street woke awakening or whatever. And I was utterly horrified by how the left, the so-called left, which at that point was my political home, how they responded to the destruction of Libya. There was almost no anti-war movement to speak of. It was very small. It was Workers' World and Party of Socialism and Liberation. And that was almost it. And it was very, very small, very, very small demonstrations. And the bulk of the socialist and communist groups supported it. And as I point out in the introduction that I wrote to the Green Book, even our response, the group I was in, even our response was cowardly. There was constant effort to distance ourselves from Gaddafi politically, which I found to be absolutely reprehensible. I went and I read the Green Book. I read the Green Book at the time, and I was blown away by the brilliance of Gaddafi. On top of that, it was very clear, if you read this book, Libya is a socialist country, right? It has an economy where profits are not in command. The economy is rationally organized, overcoming the problem of overproduction, the falling rate of profit. Oil was the main revenue source. The government controlled the oil and used the oil to set up various industries to guarantee housing to the population. They had these communal councils that existed in every neighborhood that were kind of like Soviets or committees to defend the revolution, etc. And that Libya basically had the same economic system that Cuba has, the same economic system that North Korea has, the same economic system that any other communist country has. It's just their ideology was not Marxism-Leninism. It was Islamic socialism. I mean, it was clear to me that Libya was a socialist country. But yet, even though we supported Gaddafi against American imperialism, it was constantly Libya is not a socialist country, was the talking point. Libya is a bourgeois nationalist regime. And Gaddafi, yeah, he's corrupt. Yeah, he's a brutal dictator. Yeah, he hurts a lot of people. And I'm like, no, Gaddafi is a hero. Gaddafi supported the Black Panthers. Gaddafi supported the IRA. Gaddafi raised his own nation up out of poverty and provided housing and healthcare and jobs for millions of people. He built the world's largest irrigation system. I saw Gaddafi as a hero. And even the communist group that I was with that nominally supported him in the name of, being anti-imperialist, they couldn't even really defend him with any courage because Barack Obama was the president, because, the critiques being made of him. I mean, they just lied about this book on NPR. When they quoted, there's one sentence in this book about menstruation, right? When he's talking, and in this book is so advanced. It was published in the mid-70s in the Arab world. And it said that women and men should have equal rights. Women should get education. Women should vote. Women should hold public office. Women could be in the military. I mean, Libya is miles ahead of Saudi Arabia, miles ahead of most Middle Eastern countries when it comes to women's rights. But yet, on NPR, they quoted the one sentence from the Green Book about menstruation. And they made it sound like this whole book was just a sexist Islamist diatribe against women or something, which it is absolutely not. This is a profound piece of writing. Chapter 1 is on democracy, and it's 3 chapters. The solution to the problem of democracy and the authority of the people, the solution to the economic problem, socialism, and the social basis of the third universal theory. And it's a very profound book. And I read this book, and I learned about how Libya was a socialist country with a rationally organized economy. I learned about the great ideas and theories of Gaddafi and Islamic socialism. And I came to the conclusion that Libya was a socialist country. And then I found out that other young people in the Workers' World Party felt the same way. People in Detroit who had never talked to me about this issue on their own had studied the Green Book, and they had discovered and they had felt that Libya was a socialist country. I talked to other members of the group, and they felt the same thing. And we couldn't get a real answer about why Libya was not a socialist country. And they would tell us stupid things, right? They'd say, well, socialism, Caleb, you don't know what socialism is. Socialism is when, there's a planned economy. And I'd say there is a planned economy in Libya. And they would say, well, no, Caleb, in socialism, see, the banks and the factories are controlled by the society as a whole, by the state. And I said, that's true in Libya. And they would just speak to me in this very condescending way, like I must be stupid and I must not know what socialism is to think Libya is socialist. And then you would point out to them, and they had never read the Green Book, and they knew nothing about what Gaddafi stood for. And, they knew nothing about it. And in fact, Libya, not only did it have a rationally organized economy, not only was it a funder and supporter of various anti-colonial movements from around the world, but Gaddafi, in this book, he goes as far as saying they can reach the higher stage of communism, a world with so much wealth and abundance that a state is not necessary. He puts that in this book. In addition to that, Gaddafi even applied to join the Warsaw Pact during the 80s. He wanted to be part of the Eastern Bloc countries of the Soviet Union. So the idea that Libya was not a socialist country, I mean, it's poppycock, right? I mean, maybe if you don't think any of these countries are socialist, if you think socialism is just this like pure egalitarian Trotskyite anarchist workers utopia that only exists in your head, fine. But if you think the Soviet Union was socialist, if you think North Korea is socialist, if you think that China today is socialist, if you think that Cuba is socialist, Libya under Gaddafi's leadership was also a socialist country. There's no question about that. The idea that there's some magical class line, right? This magical class line between Libya, a bourgeois nationalist regime, and Cuba, a workers' state. I mean, that is just a ridiculous bit of dogmatism. And, I came to the conclusion Libya was very clearly a socialist country based on what I read. And so I became very interested in all of the people around the world who had supported Libya. And I read about the different communist groups that had supported Libya from around the world. And, in my own organization, Workers' World Party had sent many delegations to Libya and had a relationship with Libya and all of that. And so that is how I first heard about this man, Gerry Healy. And Gerry Healy, you would think, is just some obscure historical figure. He's really obscure. I mean, making him the title of the stream tonight was a huge risk on my part. That's why I don't expect this stream will get very many views. I don't care, because I know the people who really care about this community and really value our work will watch. And that's who I'm talking to tonight, because this is very, very important, what I'm talking about tonight. There is so much here, right? There's so much here to talk about when it comes to Gaddafi, when it comes to Libya. There's so much here to talk about, and you're here for that. And you all need to know this story. It's very obscure, but it's very important. But apparently it's not just important to me. Why? Because this book was published in September. Gerry Healy, this man, this British anti-imperialist activist, he's been dead for 35 years. He died in the early 90s. But 35 years after his death, they published this smear book against him. Now, I was too wrapped up in election stuff. This book came out in September. I was way, way too wrapped up in the election and trying to make sure we defeated Kamala Harris and everything going on with that. I didn't have a chance to follow this when it came out. But I've been looking into things, and I am just blown away by everything. So we're going to talk about why this book was published 35 years after his death, why they're still smearing Gerry Healy. We're going to talk about who Gerry Healy was, and we're going to talk about what's going on here. And we're also going to highlight some great work. I really do commend David North and the World Socialist website. I don't agree with them on a lot of things, and they've been critical of us before, but they did great work ripping this book apart. And it looks like there's a good chance David North may come on this channel. Now I don't know if after he sees the way I'm talking tonight, maybe he won't want to come on, but I don't know. I would happily give him a platform to say the great things he's written about Gerry Healy, etc. So who was Gerry Healy? Gerry Healy was a British Trotskyist. He was born in Ireland, and as a young man, his family moved to Britain, and as a teenager, he got involved in the British Communist Party, and he eventually became a Trotskyist. And in the post-World War II years, he was just a well-known Trotskyist in Britain. And there were different splits and divides, and he eventually started his own group, the Socialist Labor League. And eventually, the Socialist Labor League became the Workers' Revolutionary Party. And Gerry Healy was their leader. And Gerry Healy, an Irishman, was very charismatic. And Gerry Healy did something that back then was very taboo. All right. See, and this is an important point that people don't understand. See, nowadays, especially in the last year, protesting for Palestine is something that liberal people do. That was not always the case. In fact, when Israel was first created as a state in 1948, it was the left that was more supportive of it. The Communist Party had big rallies demanding the creation of Israel. There was a big celebration in Times Square celebrating the creation of Israel that was put on by the Communist Party. The Soviet Union voted at the United Nations to create Israel, and it was Republicans and conservatives that were critical of Israel because a lot of them thought Israel might be a communist or socialist country because it had a labor party, because the Soviet Union was supporting it, etc. And that especially in the 1950s and 60s, even in the 70s, really wasn't even until the 80s that talking about Palestine at all was acceptable among anti-war voices. No, these are facts, right? The Communist Party of the United States did not criticize Israel and denounce Israel until 1967. And if you read Gus Hall's speech opposing Israel, it's in this book called Imperialism Today. right? You read his speech from 1967. It begins by saying Israel has a right to exist. Oh, there needs to be an Israel. The Jews need a country. But, I mean, that's how it begins. And there was no criticism of Israel by the Communist Party of the United States until the 1967 war. Until then, Israel got a free pass on no matter what it did. And the American left, they all supported Israel because a lot of leftists were Jewish, because the Soviet Union had supported Israel, and because Israel's public relations was that they were some kind of leftist socialist country. They had these communes or collectives called kibbutzim that they set up, where Israeli military people lived in kind of cooperatives or whatever. And so because Israel presented itself as leftist, because many leftists were Jewish and had experienced anti-Semitism, you didn't criticize Israel. And Israel did not get criticized. Nobody would dare talk against Israel. Israel was just above criticism. But this guy had no problem talking about Israel. And in fact, I found a pamphlet that Gerry Healy wrote. I almost want to start crying because it just makes me so angry. There's just so much wrapped up in this. 1955, Gerry Healy wrote a pamphlet opposing Israel, right? You can find it on the Marxist Internet Archive. 1955. Nobody was talking about Israel and Palestine back then, right? It was a taboo subject. You know, the communist parties were all still supporting Israel. It was, you didn't touch that, but yet you go back to 1955, and I will link you in the chat. Marxist Internet Archive, you can read a pamphlet that Gerry Healy wrote in 1955. 1956, Hands Off the Arab People, Stop This War by Gerry Healy. And his organization, whatever their flaws on other issues, I'm sure they vehemently would disagree with me about a lot of things, they were pro-Palestine. They were a pro-Palestine organization. And there's the link. You can read Hands Off the Arab People, 1956, a pamphlet that Gerry Healy and his supporters handed out on the street supporting the Palestinian people and opposing U.S. imperialism and opposing Zionism. Amazing, right? And Gerry Healy stood with the Palestinians, and he built an organization of anti-imperialists that supported the Palestinians. And his organization grew and grew and grew. And, you know, throughout the 1960s, they became bigger, and they recruited a very famous actress named Vanessa Redgrave. Vanessa Redgrave is a very, very famous actress. She's from a famous family of actors and actresses, in Britain. And Vanessa Redgrave joined Gerry Healy's organization because she found him to be very charismatic, because she agreed with their ideology, and she joined his group. And I mean, this is just, it'll blow your mind, but she joined his organization, and Gerry Healy became a friend of Gaddafi. In 1969, Gaddafi took power in Libya, and Libya started moving towards socialism. And Gerry Healy went to Libya, and he became friends with Gaddafi. And Gaddafi and him were actually very close. And Gaddafi would fly him around in his helicopter even, right? Gaddafi had a military helicopter he'd fly around with. Gerry would ride with Gaddafi in the military helicopter. And Gerry Healy saw that Palestine was so important, and he had recruited this very famous actress, Vanessa Redgrave. And so, I kid you not, 1977, Vanessa Redgrave, with funding from Libya, they made the first full-length movie supporting the Palestinians that had ever been made. I'm going to show you some clips from that movie, right? But Vanessa Redgrave, this famous Hollywood actress, she was working with Gerry Healy. She was a member of Gerry Healy's organization, and she made The Palestinians, which was a movie, a full-length movie telling the truth about what Israel was doing to the Palestinians, supporting the Palestinians and their struggle against Zionism. It was just an utterly amazing thing, right? And when the issue of Palestine was forbidden, you know, when I was in the Workers' World Party, we used to brag that we had the first national anti-war protest with a Palestinian speaker. And that was true. And you know what year that was? 1981. There was not an anti-war protest with a Palestine speaker in Washington, D.C., a pro-Palestine demonstration or an anti-war protest that talked about Palestine in the United States until 1981. It was a touchy subject. Nobody talked about it. They considered the Arabs to be anti-Semitic. Most of the communist groups were dominated by people of Jewish descent, which is, I mean, they had experienced anti-Semitism, and because of that, you couldn't touch Palestine. But Vanessa Redgrave, she made this film, The Palestinian, which you can watch, 1977. She made this film, The Palestinian, and I'm going to put it on. All right, I'm gonna put some of that movie on because people don't. This is why they're still smearing Gerry, and this is why this stuff matters, and that this is complicated. This is obscure history, but obscure history is important to us because this is our roots. This is our heritage. We are anti-imperialists, and we need to know where we came from. But it's also important to the other side. This is important to the enemy. They know where they came from, and they know who their enemies are. This is the sum of the film, 1977, The Palestinian.
We have only 20% of the water supply. And even this 20% of water supply was from one source, which is very close to the positions of the phalangists. And I know that when the mothers go by nights to fetch water, they just said to each other farewell, because nobody knows if he is coming back or not. And we have the martyrs of water. We have a daily average of 15, 17, One day we had 37 because the phalangists used to throw bombs on this source of water. And in spite of that, mothers, people were trying. Of course, we have big.
هاي الأخت 4 شباب وأبوهن راحوا. هاي الست. هاي كمان جوزها مات. وأخوها مات. كل واحد عنده مشكلة بحياته. كل واحد. لولا ما هي المصيبة جماعة يعني يمكن كنا متنا زمان. بس أنا مصيبتي وهي عندها مصيبة وهي عندها مصيبة وهي عندها مصيبة، يعني بنشوف كل الناس عندها مصايب مثل بعضنا البعض.
حوالي 652
هون
يقتلك مثلا شو بتعملي؟
ساعتها بيكون هذا مش جريح، ده بيكون مقاتل. يعني مثل بيقولوا ضبع كاسر.
أخذ الهدف جيد.
houses, the minds of people, the streets.
Et des capitaux investis au Liban, cette richesse qui est le capital, qui est l'initiative.
Make out is that the Palestinians have come into Lebanon, and particularly into South Lebanon, to take everything over. But it's the Palestinians who are causing all the troubles. And of course the purpose of the Israeli shelling and the fascist shelling is try to frighten and panic the South Lebanese villagers and farmers into calling for the removal of the Palestinians. But that hasn't worked. It's the other way around. And the reason it hasn't worked, as such strategies have never worked, they never worked in Vietnam, they never worked in the African countries, and they're not working here either, starts from the situation that ordinary people are really living in.
That's Vanessa Redgrave, the actress, famous Hollywood actress who was a member of Gerry Healy's organization. And so she made this movie with funding from Gaddafi, and they showed it all over the world describing what the Palestinians are facing.
There are about 500,000 people living in South Lebanon, and at least half of them came down south in the course of the last 2 years during the war in Beirut. There's virtually no industry at all, about 500 jobs in the oil company, another 1,000 jobs in various forms of transport, about 500 workers who work in clerical jobs in the banks and so on. But apart from that, to make a living in South Lebanon, you have to be working either in tobacco or in the citrus fruit production.
This is.
People ran away.
Now you're getting ahead of me, Funky. You're getting ahead of me. But anyway, you can go watch the movie The Palestinian on your own time. But it was all over the world that this movie was shown describing the Palestinians. And then, as Funky just referenced, Vanessa Redgrave won the Oscar for Best Actress. And at the time that she was up for the nomination for Best Actress, the Jewish Defense League was protesting against any movie that any place they were showing the movies that she was in. They were outside protesting, and they said they would bomb the Oscars if Vanessa Redgrave won. And so when she took when she accepted her Oscar, her acceptance speech, which you can watch in Funky's Super Chat, in that acceptance speech, she denounced Israel and Zionism, and she got booed. And she said that, that she stood against Zionist thugs and hoodlums. And on national TV, she got the Oscar and she gave an anti-Israel speech. This was a really, really important moment for Palestine. And it wouldn't have happened without this guy, Gerry Healy. and his organization. And Gerry Healy, his group, the Workers' Revolutionary Party, that was very supportive of Libya, very supportive of Iraq, and very supportive of Syria, and extremely supportive of the Palestinians when nobody else was. They stood out, and they were known as being pro-Palestine. And there's not much video footage you can find of Gerry Healy, but there's some. And I'm going to show you Gerry Healy, this pro-Palestine, anti-imperialist Trotskyist who was a friend of Gaddafi. I'm going to show you some of the footage of him that's out there. He was a very fired up, passionate guy.
We have not only continued this struggle, we are here and we are fighting as never before to develop it on the widest possible front. And when we look at the achievements, financial, technical, without any assistance, except from who? The youth, the young trade unionists, in the factories, who gave us this means. We now can present the two basic ingredients of the workers' press. Firstly, the continuity of Bolshevism by those who have continuously fought against Stalinism and its betrayals. Secondly, the relationship between those who fought for Bolshevism in the early days and the youth of today. That's the unbreakable alliance behind the workers' press. We're not going to break now no more than we broke in the 30s. We're not going to give up the production of this paper because of some difficulties. We're very confident. Indeed, we can afford to be confident. We start this paper not at all on a shoestring. We started with the most modern technical innovations in the printing industry. And we started in London, in the centre. We are not only preparing to produce this paper in large quantities over the next 2 years, we're already negotiating for a press that will produce not just 22,000 copies an hour, but 60,000 copies an hour. We are not going to fold up. On the contrary, we have only just started. We have enormous technical resources. We will not only produce our paper, we will do what was impossible in the early 1920s. We will show it on screens all over the country, in talking pictures, produced by our own sympathizers. So it's different. Not only that, we are going to ally this newspaper to the development of film techniques, not only to produce this paper every day, but to produce news films alongside this paper. We are in front. We are well in front. We are not here to tell ourselves how good we are. We are here to use all these resources for one thing and one thing only. When the working class come forward to take that power, we will be there to lead them. Because we are now going to use this paper day in and day out to build this mass revolutionary party. You have provided for the revolutionary movement the first daily paper since Lenin and Trotsky called upon the Communist International in the 1920s to found their daily papers in all the countries of the world.
Yeah, they had a daily newspaper that was pro-Palestine, pro-working class, that was distributed all over the country. The only daily communist newspaper in Britain at that time. I mean, that came out every day.
72. We launched 5 right-to-work marches from Glasgow, Liverpool, South Wales, Kent, Southampton. welcomed the National Secretary of the SLL, Gerry Healy.
To the young marchers we say the following. You are our most treasured comrades. By your march you have roused decisive sections of the working class to action. You have dealt a mighty blow to the bans and prescriptions in the Tory government. You will occupy a place of honour for all time in our great movement. We will leave no stone unturned in preparing you for the all-important task in the participation and the strengthening of the leadership of the Socialist Labour League. You are our comrades for all time in this great fight.
We take another historic leap. 4,500 fill the Alexandra Palace in a rally against the Tory government.
From the history of the English working class, we know that for 200 years they have fought and defended the right to have trade unions. That trade unions in Britain are the working class. That you cannot separate the trade unions from the working class. And those who want to destroy them will have to destroy the working class. That's the issue in front of this corrupt, degenerate Tory party and its capitalist hangers on. We know that in this situation, trade unions cannot be defended by reformists and class collaborators. Trade unions can only be defended now by revolutionary action, by a revolutionary party. Therefore, in calling to build this party, in asking you to support the resolution towards the end of this rally, that we go forward from here in order to found this party, to transform the Socialist Labour League into the party, the revolutionary party of the English working class. We know we are speaking in the best revolutionary traditions of the English working class today, because they want to defend their rights, their basic rights.
Look at all those people. And what is so important about what Gerry Healy is doing is, this was a right to work march, demanding the right to a job, right? What working class person doesn't want to have a job, but demanding the right of a job and organizing around economic issues while inserting an anti-imperialist message and saying that we got to stand with Gaddafi and we got to stand with the Palestinians, right? And that's what's so powerful about this. He was doing exactly what you're supposed to do if you're an anti-imperialist. You're supposed to organize working people to understand that their economic interest is in the defeat of imperialism. He was doing what you're supposed to do, and he was building a mass working class movement with a daily newspaper, organizing, demanding the right to jobs for working people, having huge rallies demanding the right to jobs, and saying that we got to support the Palestinians and we got to support Gaddafi. And if you don't think that's a big deal, you try and do that yourself, because that's what we're trying to do with the Center for Political Innovation. And it is not easy, but he was doing it. And in the name of Trotskyism, I don't agree with Trotskyism, I don't agree with the anti-Stalin stuff, but he was doing it. He was building a mass anti-imperialist working class movement, demanding jobs for working families, standing in solidarity with those around the world, trying to mobilize the British working class against the big monopolies and big corporations that were responsible for their deteriorating conditions as austerity came in. Gerry Healy was doing it. He was building a mass movement.
And the only movement that can do that is a movement that's setting itself out to put an end to capitalism for all time.
February the 12th, 1983. The Rhineland town of Trier, Germany. Birthplace of Karl Marx, founder of scientific socialism. To commemorate his death 100 years ago, 130 youth from 7 countries assembled to start a 250-mile march through Europe. Destination, Highgate Cemetery, London.
You hear that? They're chanting "Viva, Viva Palestina," a 250-mile march from Marx's birthplace to Highgate Cemetery.
We are confident that the working class will learn in the struggle, and consequently we have no hesitation at all in saying that on this 100th centenary of Marx's death, Marxism lives. It's a vital force all over the world, and consequently we will carry the banner of Marxism high in the victory of the world socialist revolution. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and we'll continue, right? And there's more.
It wasn't just Zionist forces alone that did this job. They had the assistance of Italian radar. They had the assistance of Moroccan radar. And they had the assistance of the American installations inside Tunis of a radar nature. Therefore, it was an international imperialist assassination. That's the first thing we must understand. The second is why, on this occasion, our brother was so guarded so lightly. 2 guards. And an old man, like an old gardener, in a situation in which the most tremendous mass movement of social revolutionary character is looked upon as that. All the masses are involved. And when all the masses are involved, the Palestinian masses are involved, it's a social revolution. And history teaches us this. That when times when you're leading a socialist revolution, that the imperialist world will seek out your death. And if Lenin had to go into hiding 3 months between July and October in the Soviet Union, before the October 1917 revolution, it was because, and other leaders of the Bolshevik Party had to go into hiding. It was because the enemy always strikes at the leadership. He always hits out at the leadership. Therefore, we must say that what is going on in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank is a social revolution, not just an armed confrontation with naked fists and stones and everything else. And the Zionists know that. That is why they had to kill Abu Ghraib. Schultz was in on this. When Schultz came on his last 3rd mission, so-called peacekeeping, probing, he had...
So relevant to what's happening today with the murder of Nasrallah, with the murder of Qasem Soleimani in Iran, how the Zionists cowardly strike down leaders of the Palestinian people.
Actually came to organize and to encourage the Zionists, Shamir, Peres, all the rest of them, to kill Abu Ghraib. Schultz was in it right from the beginning. He had no other purpose to come in the Middle East. Assad told him to belt off. Even the king told him in Jordan to get off. But then why did he come? There was a big issue on the way. Because if you kill the Palestinian leadership of the PLO, then you automatically try to force some sort of an agreement down the throats of others. And we might say that it's not only Abu Ghraib, but Arafat, who is now in greatest danger, and all the leaders of the PLO, they're in the greatest danger. These other great changes are taking place in the Soviet Union itself, where you have a political revolution underway of a massive character. We know our brother, and he was not just a national leader, he was a great international leader.
ask yourself, how trusted must Gerry Healy have been by the Palestinians that a prominent Palestinian leader is killed in 1988, and they ask this white Irish dude to speak at the funeral and give this fiery speech about Marxist revolution. Look at that. He's speaking at the funeral for a Palestinian freedom fighter who was killed by Israel. And he's on the stage in a room full of Arabs. You know, I mean, that's how trusted and respected Gerry Healy was for the relentless work that Vanessa Redgrave had done, that he had done, that his mass working class organization did. I mean, this guy was a serious anti-imperialist. And there's a reason that Gaddafi flew him around on his helicopter. There's a reason that he was really, really valued. He was an amazing figure, and he led an organization of thousands and thousands of people in Britain that were trying to organize the British working class to fight for its own interest against imperialism and Zionism and stand with the Palestinians.
An occasion like this, a moment of arising and passing away. And if you are familiar with Lenin's philosophical notebooks, this matter is dealt with very thoroughly. We can't be spectators in this scene. When we are speaking, therefore, of problems that arise when we chop history into quotations, we must also make our contributions to avoid these problems that have taken place in the Soviet Union.
But anyway, so that's Gerry Healy. And I actually bought this biography of Gerry Healy, which was published after his death, Gerry Healy, A Revolutionary Life. And in it, I will read to you how they describe Gerry Healy. I mean, I'll read you towards the end. They kind of talk about his personality a little bit, and it's very touching. Right? So towards the end, it says, he worked with many people, each of whom made his or her contribution as best they could. Most awesome about Gerry Healy was that nothing would deflect him from what he knew had to be done. He would leave no stone unturned, no detail unconsidered, no loose ends. There were occasions where he lost his temper, became furious with someone. He put his fist through his office door at least once in Clapham, right? He got fired up. He put his fist through the office door. Such anger was invariably aroused by a gross political mistake. After the storm, the error would be collectively analyzed in order to learn the lessons for the future. For those looking in both directions politically, and those who sought to defend their egos, both inside and outside of the party, this single-mindedness made him unbearable. Those who shared his aims and worked closely with him came under heavy pressure as a result. It was his total commitment, his determination, that the revolutionary forces and the working class must be victorious in the only way that they can, through collective battle, which frightened those who were not prepared to go all the way. What gave him the aspect of terror was not a threat of physical violence. He was, after all, a very short man. But that, from a Marxist standpoint, he was correct, and that behind him stood the party. He was tough with members of the party, but not to hurt them, but to prepare and train them for the realities of revolutionary struggle. What amazed people was that there could be such a man who personified completely what he stood for. He was a live wire, full of anxiety and tension, straining to extract the maximum out of each moment, each political change, each person with whom he worked. He lived each moment totally. The power of his thought was extracted painfully from vicissitude. He agreed with the German philosopher who said there is no understanding without passion. For Healy, that passion meant the utmost partisanship in the class struggle. Healy knew that to operate as a revolutionary, to defeat the enemy, determination had to be tempered with concepts which were, as Lenin described them, hewn, treated, flexible, mobile, relative, mutually connected, united in opposites in order to embrace the world. Well, he was a very, very, very passionate, dedicated, anti-imperialist, anti-Zionist friend of the Palestinians. So what happened? Well, in 1985, right? 1985, they've got this massive organization that they've built. The miners' strike in Britain has just been defeated. Gaddafi, the leader of Libya, right, is accused of having funded the miners' strike, which if he did, good for him, right? If Gaddafi gave some of Libya's money to support miners in Britain to demand that they get their union rights and decent pay, good for Gaddafi. But part of how they broke the miners' strike of 1984 was they blamed it on Gaddafi. They said Gaddafi had funded the miners' strike. Well, good for Gaddafi, right? I mean, Russian meddling. Haven't we heard that before? I guess this is Libyan meddling, right? Just like they accused Martin Luther King Jr. of being a Russian agent, just like they raided the homes of Chairman O'Malley and the Uhuru House and accused them of being Russian agents. They accused the Miners' Union, the National Union of Miners, the NUM of Britain. They accused them of being Libyan agents, and they broke the strike. And Gerry Healy's organization had been big supporters of the strike and big supporters of the miners. And 1985, here's what happened, right? Are you ready for this? So Gerry Healy, he had a secretary who was his personal secretary. Wasn't married to him, but they had a kind of on and off sexual relationship, right? You know, she was employed by the party, and he was also employed by the party, and she was his personal secretary, and he was single, he wasn't married, and the two of them had an affair. And he, you know, Gerry Healy was not married, and he had girlfriends. He was a bit of a player, right? And he had other girlfriends in the party. This number that they throw around, they say 26 women. But that number may be exaggerated. He had affairs, right? He had girlfriends, and everything was completely consensual, right? And if you read the allegations against him, everything is completely consensual. His secretary, however, she found out about the other women and felt jealous, and so she went to the mainstream media, and they ran a whole story claiming that he had sexually abused women. But if you look at the details, everything was consensual, completely consensual. They argued that he abused his position as the leader of the group, right? That he abused his position as the leader of the group in order to, to have these affairs with women. Well, if he did that, that was wrong and he shouldn't have done it, okay? But does that matter, right? I mean, is that the issue here? Did he rape anybody? No, he didn't. He's never charged with a crime. Did he sexually assault anybody, touch somebody without their permission? Nope, never once. No one alleges he did anything that was unconsensual. He had a lot of girlfriends in the group. He had girlfriends. The guy was a bit of a womanizer. The guy, maybe there was a sex addiction issue. Who knows what was going on? But he had a lot of girlfriends. And the mainstream media went crazy with it. Claiming that, oh my God, it was a sex cult and it was a sexual abuser, and they went crazy. And the Workers' Revolutionary Party split in about 5 different ways because of this. But I will read to you what is on the back of this book, right? And this book was published after Gerry Healy's death. And this says, this is a quote. It says, "I have never changed my belief that the split in the Workers' Revolutionary Party in 1985 was the work of MI5 agents." Now, who said that? Some crazy conspiracy theorist? No. That's Ken Livingston. Ken Livingston, The mayor of London, the mayor of the biggest city in England, said he has no doubt that the stupid sex scandal they used to break apart the Workers' Revolutionary Party and destroy the reputation of Gerry Healy was the result of the police agents, right? The British equivalent of the FBI. If the mayor of London is saying that he thinks that the sex scandal and all of that was the work of MI5, that's a pretty strong argument to have on your side. Ken Livingstone, the mayor of London, a member of parliament for the Labour Party and the mayor of London, says he has no doubt that the sexual allegations against Gerry Healy and all that was run all through the mainstream media, that was the work of the British secret police, the MI5. Now, it'd be one thing if some crazy conspiracy said it, or, his trusted supporter, but Vanessa Redgrave, the actress, she stood by Gerry Healy and she defended him to the end. And she said, I think she said to one of the reporters, they said, well, 26 women have said this. And she said, I don't care if it's 100 women. They're all lies. It's all lies. And I mean, I don't know if lies is the word I would use, but it's not substantial, right? Again, if it was sexual assault, rape is rape, sexual assault is sexual assault. A guy having girlfriends and maybe abusing his position or, whatever, that's a different story, right? But if Vanessa Redgrave stood by him, the mayor of London stood by him, the whole thing was it was Me Too before Me Too, right? And it was a stupid thing. And it was a way to avoid talking about politics. And Gerry Healy, he kept going, and he had a group of supporters, and they continued their organization. And, before he died, he ended up giving classes in the Soviet Union. In the last years of the Soviet Union, they started speaking more positively about Trotsky. I don't like Trotsky, so I don't think that was a good thing. But he ended up going to the Soviet Union and giving lectures on Trotsky. And in the back of this book, they have a chapter by a Soviet college professor who welcomed Gerry Healy as a guest lecturer at universities in Moscow. This guy was a dynamic anti-imperialist, right? And it was very dynamic. And he died. I think, when did he die? He died in like 1991, I think, right? When did Gerry Healy die, right? When did Gerry Healy die? 1992. He died in 1992. So he has been dead. Like, I was 4 years old when Gerry Healy died, okay? Like, he's been dead a long time, right? He's been dead a long time. He's been dead and buried, right? And, there's still a small group in Britain that supports him, that published this book, and Vanessa Redgrave supported him to the end. Ken Livingstone, the former mayor of London, he defends him. Other people, whatever. He's been dead. He's been dead a long time. So I've always kind of been a fan of Gerry Healy, right? I bought this biography of him. I've watched films of him. I've read some of his articles and stuff, and I just find him to be kind of an interesting guy. Whatever. David North, who might be coming on this channel later this week. He's invited for sure. He wrote this book, Gerry Healy and His Place in the History of the Fourth International, which I bought a while. I've just been an admirer of Gerry Healy for being such a strong anti-imperialist, because Gaddafi is so important in my own political development, and there was a relationship between Gerry Healy and Gaddafi. I've been fascinated by this. So fast forward to 2024. 2024, again, September of this year, we're having a major election in the United States. I'm not paying attention to Gerry Healy. I'm focused on defeating Kamala Harris. But, hey, what happens? Out of the blue, this book gets published. The Party is Always Right. The Untold Story of Gerry Healy and British Trotskyism. Bum, bum, bum. And I'm amused, right? Because I'm very interested in Gerry Healy, and I'm thinking, what's going on here? Now, I just got my hands on the book today, and I went through it this afternoon, but I had the opportunity to watch the author of the book speak on a Zoom call, and I watched people challenge the author of the book. Now, I cut the Zoom call I cut some highlights as I want you to see this, but this book was published. The author is Aidan Betty, who is an Irish-born college professor who's a big leader of Democratic Socialists of America, who writes for Jacobin Magazine, right? And tweets frequently about how he loves AOC. He loves AOC. He loves Bernie Sanders. And he decided, for some reason, we don't know why, but you're going to know why pretty soon, that out of the blue, he just decided to write this book that is a smear job against Gerry Healy. And so I'm going to show you the author. I'm going to show you some of the people challenging him, and we're going to go over the facts here.
Parties, the Socialist Labour League and the Workers' Revolutionary Party, who's a man named Gerry Healy, who is well known within that world, but probably not that well known outside of the world of the SLL and the WRP and some of their affiliated groups. And I'll kind of use his life story essentially as the thread to talk about these different political parties and where they came from politically. His life story, in one sense, it's a story of violence, of scandals, of even sexual abuse.
No, it's a story of being a heroic anti-imperialist standing with the Palestinians. That's what it's a story of. It's a story of standing with the Palestinians when no one else would. It's a story of building a mass anti-imperialist movement in Britain. That's what it's a story of, you fucking idiot.
Accusations that this organization was a cult, accusations that they were engaging in conspiracy theories, celebrities.
No, we can't do that. Can't engage in conspiracy theories.
For various reasons got involved. And then at the heart of all that is this one man named Gerry Healy, who has either been conveniently forgotten by people who were once some of his closest supporters, or in other cases, remembered in very negative terms. And his life story could be a very gossipy one, which wasn't the type of story I wanted to tell.
Oh, no.
But it is definitely a very emotional story for the people involved. But his life story is also, and I think more importantly, a story about Trotskyism, about the political tradition that both gave birth to Gerry Healy as a political activist, and which he also in turn helped to create and recreate. And I've come to see it as a kind of cautionary tale about the tendency that Trotskyism has often had towards schisms and personal animosity, and about what I see as the inherent flaws in so-called democratic centralist parties that often brook no dissent, and I think can even act as incubators for predatory people like Gerry Healy. All the other important details that he would later recall about his childhood and early life were exaggerated, if not fabricated wholesale. He claimed to have grown up in very extreme poverty. His family actually owned a quite large farm of 103 acres in a country where anyone owning over 50 acres was considered a so-called strong farmer. He claimed that at age 6, he saw his father be shot and killed by the Black and Tans, which...
No, he didn't. And that, Gerry Healy never said that. And we'll get into that later.
It was an outright lie. And as can be heard in the few recordings made of him, his accent, which was mostly a London Cockney accent, but with certain cadences still lingering from the west of Ireland, made him seem somewhat unplaceable.
Like, what is that? Like, his accent didn't sound right? Like, what the hell is that? The guy spent most of his life living in London. Like, what are you talking about? Like, his accent didn't sound right?
The SLL is really the only alternative to either social democracy or reformism, if you want to call it that, or communism, Stalinism, if you want to call it that. So if you are basically on the left in British politics and you don't want to join the Labour Party because you see it as too capitulatory and too moderate, you don't want to join the Communist Party because you see it as too doctrinaire, your only real option...
See, this shows you how out of touch this guy is with left-wing politics in general. The British Communist Party in the 1970s and 80s was viewed as a very moderate force, right? They were just like CPUSA over here. Tone it down, vote for the Labour Party, etc. People didn't avoid the Communist Party because they thought it was too doctrinaire, right? But he's thinking like a pro-imperialist intellectual, right? Oh, they're Stalinists and we can't be associated with Stalinist regime. Everyone saw the British CP as a moderate force that toned everything down. And the Labour Party was not a communist party. It was a mainstream social democratic party. And so, no, if you wanted, the idea that you had to join Gerry Healy's group because they were the only other group you could. That's ridiculous. There were all kinds of Maoist groups. There were all kinds of other Trotskyist groups. I mean, right there, that just shows you. And that's the critique of the British Communist Party. I also want to point out to you the name of the book. And this is just worth pointing out. The Party is Always Right. Now, he says that the name of his book, it comes from a book. It comes from a quote from Leon Trotsky. Yeah, there is a quote from Trotsky about the party is always right. Sure. But we all know what that's alluding to, what you're supposed to think of. Right? You're supposed to think of Boxer the horse in Animal Farm. Right? Boxer the horse, who's supposed to be the stupid Russian working class that supported Stalin. Right? Boxer the horse says Napoleon is always right, referring to the head of the pigs who's supposed to represent Stalin, right? And that's what he's getting at, right? He's saying that it's a cult. These people are brainwashed. The party is always right. Napoleon is always right. Boxer the horse, who's a loyal, hardworking horse in Animal Farm by George Orwell, who eventually gets sent to the glue factory because the Russian working class, the people who defeated Hitler, the people who raised their country up from poverty, they're all just a bunch of stupid cult followers. Napoleon is always right. That's what he's alluding to, right? This is really designed to dog whistle George Orwell in your mind, right? That's really what this is aimed at. This is a Khrushchevist liberal piece, and we'll get into this. The ideology that this man is pushing. Shout out to David North and all of them for the facts they debunked. We're going to take this book apart more ideologically, but let's continue, right?
For another party to join on the left is the SLL. As the 60s progressed, and as we say, anti-Vietnam War protests become stronger and stronger, the SLL doesn't really take part in that. And a sympathetic interpretation of that is that they refused to offer uncritical support to the Stalinism of the Viet Cong. A blunter view, and I think maybe a more accurate view, is that they were skeptical of any popular movement that they couldn't control.
No, it was that we all know that the hippie counterculture movement of the 1960s that embraced drugs and sexual promiscuity and all kinds of stuff was anti-working class. And they were trying to build a working class movement, and that the new left was fake. It was the product of MK Ultra. It was the product of the Congress for Cultural Freedom program, and that the new left, the hippie counterculture anti-Vietnam War movement, was fake and it was controlled. Right? Gerry Healy was friends with John Lennon. I mean, he knew John Lennon of the Beatles, and he was very involved in being anti-imperialist, but he saw the big anti-war movement that was just kind of give peace a chance and didn't talk about imperialism and certainly hated the working class, didn't talk about class struggle. Yeah, he wasn't trying to appeal to them. So that's a misrepresentation as well.
And this opposition to anti-war protests, which even on a couple of occasions led to SLL members handing out flyers encouraging people not to join anti-war marches, confused and alienated potential allies.
Right, yeah, they should have built a working class movement, and these big kind of liberal, hippie counterculture marches were not what the working class needed to build a real anti-imperialist movement. Again, he doesn't understand that, right? He thinks, they just couldn't control it. They just couldn't control it.
Allies on the left. The party is not a very welcoming place for feminism or even just for women.
Oh boy, they're not feminist enough. Oh boy.
In general, which is something I'll talk about a little bit more at the end. And this remains the kind of internal culture.
I bet they mansplained all the time. Oh boy. Oh boy. Oh my God. I bet they didn't even start their meetings with whose pronouns to use. Oh boy. Man, it wasn't feminist enough. I bet they read Marx and Lenin and Rosa Luxemburg and not Judith Butler. Oh my God. Oh my God. Oh my God.
The WRP throughout the 1970s. The party remained well known on the left, even if it remained a somewhat small group. They also began to amass a suspiciously large portfolio of capital assets, ranging from a country house in Derbyshire that they used for Marxist educational retreats, a full-colour printing press in Merseyside in the north of England that they used to print their daily paper, Newsline, which was the first and, to the best of my knowledge, only ever Trotskyist daily newspaper in the world. a fleet of 50 mopeds used to distribute the paper nationally, 8 flats in Clapham in London where party members lived, a party headquarters nearby, a network of bookshops in major cities, a network of youth training centres, a film and theatre company, and a luxury car used by Gerry Healy.
Yep, they built an organization. They had a daily newspaper. They had, centers where they could, give educational trainings. They had motorcycles to hand out their newspaper on, and good for them.
At their height, there were 90 full-time employees in the party, which is a quite excessive staff for a party that never really had more than 3,000 members at any one time. How exactly they're paying for all this, I think, fuels a large amount of speculation elsewhere on the radical left in Britain. So there's already rumors swirling around in the late 1970s.
Yeah, and who pays for Jacobin? You lying, jerk. Who pays for the magazine that publishes this guy's writings? Who pays for it? Well, Ben Norton revealed who funds Jacobin a long time ago. Go and read it for yourself. Jacobin magazine is paid for by Israel. It's paid for by the Jewish Communal Fund, which is a pro-Israel foundation, right? So he is one to talk about who pays for things. And we'll be getting to that later because this Zoom call gets pretty spicy really quickly. But the people who print this guy's writings are literally Zionists, right? Ben Norton revealed that Jacobin is funded by Israel, is funded by the Jewish Communal Fund.
That are accusing the WRP of being in receipt of money from either the Libyan or the Iraqi governments.
All right, but I guess it's okay for you to be funded by the Israeli government.
When Sean Matgamna, a Trotskyist who had once been allied to Healy,
funny about all this stuff about accusing people of being foreign agents. Doesn't that sound a lot like what the FBI has been up to lately? Raiding people's homes, charging the Uhuru movement. I'm headed to Florida for their sentencing hearing pretty soon. Funny that a socialist, just randomly, some socialist, at the same time, the American government is trying to throw socialists in jail for supposedly being foreign agents. So interesting that a socialist writes a book all about how Gerry Healy was a foreign agent and spreading conspiracy theories.
Allegations in print, the WRP tried to sue him for libel. When the BBC ran an expose on the WRP's finances and Middle Eastern connections in 1983, Healy wrote articles in response alleging...
Oh, this is great. This is great. Wait till you hear this part.
Which is a quite excessive staff for a party that never really had more. And in other ways, these accusations were products of Trotsky alleging that this was the work of Zionist operatives within the British media, which really, I think, starts to cross over into a kind of anti-Semitic conspiracy theory.
Yeah, if you think the media is critical of Zionism, you must be anti-Semitic.
Or the Iraqi governments. When Sean Matgamna, a Trotskyist who had once been allied to Healy, made these allegations in print, the WRP tried to sue him for libel. When the BBC ran an expose on the WRP's finances and Middle Eastern connections in 1983, Healy wrote articles in response alleging that this was the work of Zionist operatives within the British media, which really, I think, starts to cross over into a kind of anti-Semitic conspiracy theory.
Can you believe this? Right? He says that thinking that the mainstream media in Britain might smear anti-imperialist activists is anti-Semitic, right? Can you believe this? Like, this guy says this with a straight face that, oh my God, thinking that that the Zionist operatives in the media. I mean, this is classic.
The workings of the British media, and it's being controlled by shadowy Zionist elements. And I also think some of these stories...
Get that, folks? You're not allowed to say that media is biased in support of Israel. If you do, you're an anti-Semite.
They're actually they're partly the fault of WRP members themselves, including Healy, who are very happy to boost the idea that they have very high-level connections to figures like Saddam Hussein or Muammar Gaddafi.
And they should, because we need to build an anti-imperialist movement, and that the main enemy of working people is at home. It's not around the world, and that our job is to mobilize working people to stand with the people of the world against imperialism. Our real enemy is at home. That's like a basic principle. That's what you should be doing.
And in other ways, these accusations were products of Trotskyism's very polemical culture where charged allegations are just thrown around recklessly. So into the 1980s, this is the party that Healy presided over, and he had a very notoriously authoritarian control of the WRP. And then, seemingly out of nowhere, he was expelled from his own party in October 1985 amidst shocking allegations that he had sexually abused at least 26 women within the party and possibly...
that he'd had consensual affairs. And the number 26 is not validated, by the way, but he had some consensual affairs.
More. The organization split into multiple different factions in the aftermath of this. If people wish, I'm happy to go into more detail about what actually happens there.
No, we don't actually wish, because we don't care. We're here concerned about opposing imperialism and building a working class movement. We are not concerned about what you wrote your book about, which is a disgusting scandal gossip hit piece.
But I want to end by maybe just talking more broadly about what kind of party this is, or what kind of lessons we can take from this history.
Right. Yes. There's a time and place for discussion of political issues, which we're more than willing to conduct. But this is a discussion. The prerequisite for any discussion of political issues is historical truth and historical accuracy. And the subject of today's meeting, as I understood it, is the book that has been put out by Aidan Beatty, which is, to be blunt, a scurrilous, slanderous attack on Gerry Healy, on the history of the Trotskyist movement in Britain and internationally. I first must state as a preface to making certain points about Beatty's book is that he contacted me in early 1973 and said he wanted to talk to me about the Workers' Revolutionary Party. I did speak to him, and the first question I raised with him is, what did he know about the history of the Trotskyist movement? What had he read? And he acknowledged that he had read virtually nothing. And the initial discussion, and by the way, the chats which followed are all documented, and I've published them. He did not have any familiarity with the history of the Trotskyist movement. And then he sent me finally, he was very anxious to interview me. He finally sent me a message asking for a contact for a woman comrade. It was by that point very clear that what he was doing was not writing a history of any serious character, but he wanted to write basically a scandal document of an anti-communist character on the Workers' Revolutionary Party. I asked him, by the way, as well, had he read any of my extensive and exhaustive criticisms of the WRP and of the politics and theories advanced by Gerry Healy between 1982 and 1985. He had read none of it. He was not familiar with it, though the critique that I've written probably numbers in the hundreds and hundreds of pages. He was totally unfamiliar and, in fact, uninterested in any of the political, theoretical, historical issues that arose in the conflict in the Workers' Revolutionary Party. And in fact, the central issue which is raised by his book is he presents his book as the work of a historian. But none of the basic qualifications and responsibilities that a historian has in writing history is followed by Beatty. Virtually everything he says is unsourced, unsubstantiated, based entirely on allegations made by political enemies of Gerry Healy.
Yeah, and that's how they write if you go to Barnes & Noble and you get a biography of Stalin or Mao, everything in it is, well, I talked to so-and-so and they said one time, or they said he tortured animals when he was a child, or that's how they write smear pieces. There's no facts. There's no quotations from Stalin or Mao about what they were actually doing. It's all just, oh, I talked to this person who didn't like them, and they said blank, and that's how they write history, right? And that's what this book is. That's what Aidan's book is. But let David continue.
Gerry Healy had many political enemies, which he accumulated in the course of a long career, among the Stalinists, among the anarchists, among, of course, the Pabloites. This is well known. But I want to just focus on a few points of Beatty's book, and I think he has a responsibility to answer it. He begins his book by claiming, and he presents it as the foundational lie of...
Okay, David,
let me just finish what I'm saying.
We're going to limit the comments to 3 minutes a person.
I will not speak that long because we've really published much of this on the workers in the World Socialist website. But he starts by saying that Healy lied when he claimed that he saw his father killed by the Black and Tans. In fact, Healy never made such a claim. There is not a single account based on documents, based on anything Healy wrote, in which he made such a statement. These are all post-1985 hearsays. We will be publishing very shortly a interview with Irish comrades who knew Gerry Healy in the 1960s, who testified that Healy never made such a claim.
Yeah. He starts out the book just to get you to hate Gerry Healy. He says, well, Gerry Healy claimed that his father was murdered by the British military, the Black and Tans, and he has this story, and it's not true. It's not true. Gerry never said that. He never said that. There is not one shred of evidence that Gerry Healy ever claimed his father was murdered by the Black and Tans. All that he's got is people who don't like Gerry years later said that. And they've got all kinds of people who worked with Gerry Healy. They said he never talked about his childhood. He never brought that up. He starts out his book by saying Gerry Healy lied about his childhood. He never said that. There's not a shred of evidence other than the testimony of people who just hated his guts. Certain people who just hated him on a personal level saying, yeah, I heard him say that. All kinds of people, and they've done the hard work, the people at the World Socialist website. They have gone and they have investigated all kinds of people who worked with Gerry Healy said, we had never heard this claim. And he starts out the book by poisoning the well.
I have spoken to Healy's daughter. She who is not referenced, by the way, by Aidan Beatty. He never made such a claim.
His daughter never heard that story. Right? You'd think his daughter, right? If Gerry was going around telling everyone about how his father died, you think his daughter would, he would have told his granddaughter that the granddaughter of the allegedly killed grandfather. He never said this. Like the very opening of the book is a lie just to make you hate Gerry Healy.
He also claimed this is an entire lie, and it's very important.
Okay, can you kind of wrap it
just
up?
a few?
How they're trying to cut him off, right? They don't want to let this, Jacobin Israeli-funded author, be criticized.
You let other people speak for a group.
Well, yeah, there are other people who are on the panel.
Well, but I think I'm speaking as somebody who has firsthand knowledge of Gerry Healy.
There are other people that have firsthand knowledge.
No, and you should let me finish what I'm saying. I'll be finished within 5 minutes.
Well,
the other point he says,
you've already had more than.
Obviously, you don't want me to speak and expose this. Because you gave an enormous amount of time to people to attack the Socialist Equality Party. You'll let me finish making these points about Aidan Beatty's.
Well, okay.
He also claims, and which is entirely untrue, that Healy manufactured his history. He did nothing of the sort. He claims that Healy came from an area of Ireland which was relatively quiet. In fact, Healy was born in one of the most violent areas of the Civil War and Revolution.
That's 100% inaccurate. You have no idea what you're talking about. You are an uninformed clown.
No. Okay, and you don't. And by the way, in one point, in which you
call this too hard. This is getting us nowhere. This is getting us nowhere.
Okay, David, we're prepared. We're prepared. David,
I'm not a Zionist, you clown.
David,
for the last 10 years of your academic career, you have been extensive.
Okay, David, we're prepared to have a discussion about the history with you giving equal time, but that's not what this is. This is an analysis of the book and with panelists and an open discussion. And
you're muting me the moment I raise issues relating to his background. Why does it?
Okay, look, you had time, and I think that
You did not give him time.
People want to find out what your positions are.
Yeah, and Aiden Beatty is a Zionist operative. He might say, I oppose Israel, but in the book, in acknowledgments, he admits, quote, my research in Britain was funded by the Program on Jewish Studies and the World Center at the University of Pittsburgh, who are generous enough to see the Jewish, Israeli, Palestinian, and global connections of this project. That's in the acknowledgments of the book. It's not enough that Jacobin is itself funded by Zionists, but in the acknowledgments of this book, they admit that this was funded by the Program on Jewish Studies, which is pro-Israel, because they see it as connected to the Israeli-Palestinian question, because it's a smear piece on the top anti-Zionist activist in Britain in the 70s and 80s. We can obviously see what's going on here, right? And I mean, this is so reprehensible. It's so obvious. They could at least make it harder. I mean, they don't have to admit, they don't have to give credit, right? I mean, he could have thanked them without saying why they gave them funding. They were generous enough to see the Jewish, Israeli, Palestinian, and global implications. Basically, right, we're going to write a hit piece on a great anti-Israel activist who built up support for Gaddafi and for the Palestinians among the British working class. We're going to run a smear piece on him, and that's very, very valuable for global reasons. I mean, that's in the acknowledgments. This book that was printed by a major socialist press, that's published by Jacobin and all this is a Zionist smear piece against one of the greatest allies of the Palestinian movement in British history. And if right there, they tell you what they're doing.
Quite open to go to the
you're not letting me
website.
Speak.
Okay, so
limited amount of time to but you don't. Mr. Beatty is a subject. Why was he financed?
Look, David.
What was your application
David,
to Israeli and other institutes to get money?
David, do I have to give you a meeting to?
Because I'm an academic.
No, you're not. You're not working as. What was the basis?
David, do I have to remove you from the meeting?
Which led.
David, do I have to remove you from the meeting?
David North, in his review of this book on the World Socialist website that I encourage those of you to who haven't done so to read, characterizes the book as hack work, and I think it's an apt characterization. Mr. Beatty presents himself as an Irish historian, and that's the hook on which he hangs the subject, because Healy was born in Ireland. One of the most astonishing things about this book is that there's virtually nothing about Irish history, and what there is a false presentation. As far as the black and tan story, I looked into this. I wrote on this as well. There is no written source that can be found. It appears that Sean McDomna may be the earliest progenitor of this. McDomna is a notorious liar. He's a Zionist who, among other things, called for the retention of British forces in Northern Ireland and American forces in Iraq. This is the sort of people who were interviewed for this book.
So somebody who hated Gerry Healy, who then became a neocon, a trot who became a neocon. That's never happened before. A trot who became a neocon, who wants to who supported the invasion of Iraq. That's the guy who made up this claim, right? And there's no written evidence of it. And that's the base. The entire book starts out with claiming that Gerry Healy told everyone that his father was killed by the black and tans, when no one ever heard him say that. And the source on it is some guy who became a neocon years later and supported the U.S. invasion of Iraq.
One of the knowledgeable sources on Gerry Healy. The first pages of the book contain not a single archival reference to Irish history, and the one secondary scholarly work that is used is misused. And this is just the first few pages. As for Mr. Beatty's funding history, he can, I think that those in this meeting, I'll put in the chat box an article that recently appeared on the World Socialist website. It's quite a history of being funded by Zionist and pro-Zionist sources, including such very outspoken Zionist sources as the Azrieli Institute in Montreal. I've looked at some of Mr. Beatty's books, and they are classically Zionist. They write out of history of the Palestinians. In his major book on Irish masculinity, which is actually a comparative study between Irish nationalism, a very false equation between Irish nationalism and Zionism.
Wow. Right? He wrote a book saying that Irish nationalism, the people of Ireland fighting for their national liberation, and Zionism are the similar. All right, and comparing the two of them. I mean, this guy claims he's not a Zionist. I mean, wow.
Being an anti-colonial struggle, the other, the quintessential colonizer's ideology. There are 3 entries for Palestinians in the whole book. One could go on. And I think he should answer for these questions. He has not done so. But this book is a hit piece on Gerry Healy. His sources, his so-called oral history project, which he intends evidently to keep under wraps, was conducted with enemies of Healy's that he culled together as his major archival source, so-called. So we're not quite done with this. As David noted, there will be another article that will actually get into Irish history. It's a very fascinating and explosive period in Irish history, including in the west of Ireland. And Mr. Beatty, his characterization of it is completely and utterly false.
Okay, thank you, Tom. Aidan, and then Alex, and then Tom McInerney.
So the reason I don't respond to these comments is because they're stupid, and I'm not going to waste my time.
Yeah, it's just like the USA at the UN Security Council. Russia will come out with all kinds of evidence of chemical weapons being used by the Ukrainians, of disabled people being tortured, of war crimes, and then they'll just get there and be like, I'm not going to respond. These are just conspiracy theories, and they just move on, right? And it's just they are only able to get away with that because they're defending the powers that be, right? And you'll notice, this Aidan creep is so offended at the possibility that maybe Gerry Healy got money from Libya. Maybe Gerry Healy got money from Iraq. But he tweets in support of AOC all the time, and she gives money and weapons to Nazis in Ukraine. And he tweets in support of Bernie Sanders all the time, who supported the USA invading Afghanistan and occupying it for 20 years. And it's like, as long as you're supporting the mainstream, there's no blood on your hands, right? The cancel culture doesn't apply, but my God, God forbid that, that Gerry Healy possibly maybe got some money from Libya. God forbid that. I mean, it's like they're deflecting to the bias. They think U.S. imperialism is good. They think anyone who criticizes U.S. imperialism is just spreading propaganda, spreading conspiracy theories. And they just laid out there that this guy and openly admits, I'll put it on the screen again, openly admits that he was paid by Zionist institutions to do it, to write the book, because they saw it had implications for Israel, right? They basically, he got paid to write this book as an Israeli propaganda piece. And, because it has global implications, right? And he just go, I'm not going to respond. This is stupid.
Back to an actual serious thing that was said, which is what Peter started by saying, that what attracted him to the SCP was its uncompromisingness. And then Peter goes on to say, like, there are problems with the SCP, right? There are these good things about them as an organization. I think there are good things about the WSWS, right? The scale at which it can produce documentation, can produce articles is impressive, but there are downsides to that then in terms of that becomes an end in it.
Okay, David, you have 5 minutes.
We'll make the point again. There is nothing in Aidan Beatty's book which is of a historical character. Historians base themselves on documents. They base themselves on verifiable statements, not third and fourth and fifth ad infinitum hearsay. There's nothing but hearsay in this book. I'm the only one who's speaking who actually engaged in a political struggle against Gerry Healy and produced an exhaustive critique. But what distinguished my opposition to Healy was that it was not of a personal character. I had the greatest respect, and I still do have great respect, for Gerry Healy's role in the history of the Trotskyist movement, which Mr. Beatty never addresses at all. You can't speak about Gerry Healy without, of course, discussing the historical conditions under which the Trotskyist movement fought. Gerry Healy joined the Trotskyist movement in the 1930s when it was a period where mass murder was being carried out, what has been described as the genocide of Trotskyists. He built a movement under conditions in which in Britain, the Stalinists dominated the labor movement alongside the laborites. And Gerry Healy built a movement in opposition to this, first in the closest alliance with the Socialist Workers' Party. He was a co-author and co-signatory of the document which founded the International Committee of the Fourth International. He played a monumental role, and all of those who knew Gerry and worked with him, and that includes, by the way, Alex Steiner, at one point were enormously impressed by his contribution. I think that probably includes you as well, Steve. The subsequent degeneration of the Workers' Revolutionary Party, which, by the way, was documented at length in a document which I co-authored with Kirti Balasiria, never referenced by Aidan Beatty, explained in detail the political issues which led to the generation of the WRP, and Healy and Banda and Slaughter's responsibility for that. And we also explained, and as a matter of fact, the issue of violence, sexual allegations, all of this was developed and utilized in the autumn of 1985 by Banda and Slaughter in order to shut down any discussion of the political circumstances which had led to the degeneration of the WRP. Now, as again for Aidan Beatty's book, whether he likes it or not, he presents himself as a historian. And whatever his opinions may be, or other people's opinions may be of the political line of the WRP, that's one matter. There are many people who write biographies of people with whom they don't agree politically, with whom they have differences, but there are certain rules of scholarship. And historians work with documents. He doesn't work with documents. He went into this project. He says he doesn't even remember when he first heard of Gerry Healy. Well, he's not telling the truth. He was active at the DSA at Wayne State University in Detroit. He's very familiar with our political work at Wayne State University. The DSA, of which he's a member, called Police Against Us. He's aware of all of this.
No,
he's not a politically ignorant man. And when he says, by the way, when he says in his acknowledgments that organizations which are in fact pro-Israeli, pro-Zionist organizations were generous enough to see the global and international implications of Healy's activities in the Middle East, well, he should tell us, I'd like to see the document he wrote requesting funding. He is a man who does have a very long and documented history, which can be easily verified, of being funded by Israeli organizations. He also argues, and it's central to his whole conception of Irish nationalism, that Zionism and Irish nationalism are essentially equivalent movements. When anyone who's familiar with the subject knows that the Irish movement, the Irish Republic movement, is one of the great democratic national movements of the late 19th and early 20th century. Zionism is a colonialist movement. To compare the two is a fraud. And we're making the accusation here that this is, in fact, a factional diatribe which was produced using history as a cover to essentially launch a scurrilous attack on Gerry Healy. And even those who oppose the Socialist Equality Party, and everybody has a right to belong to whatever political organization they want, and they're free to criticize the SEP as much as they want, and we can answer them. However, when you write, and you know, Steve, you came to one of my meetings and I welcomed you. No one had any objection to you coming and speaking out against our politics.
And we welcome you and others from the SEP.
However, what Mr. Beatty is doing is something entirely different.
Okay,
thank you. I'll finish 30 seconds and I'll finish. He's written a scurrilous, slanderous, lying account, and he has done this in the service of the DSA, the Democratic Party, and those who are financing him. He who pays the piper calls the tune, and that's what's involved here. And Mr. Beatty, you can laugh all you want.
Okay,
you have an obligation to explain
why
your time.
Yeah, he has no obligation. He's got mainstream media boosting him. He's got Jacobin that was advertised on an MSNBC segment. He has no obligation to be accountable. But I mean, this is great. But there's one more little bit of this Zoom call that I wanted to show you all, because it just gets classic towards the end here. I mean, this is this little bit I wanted to show you all. And then we'll talk more about it, because there's so much to talk about here, right? I'm looking forward. I really hope that Dave North will come on here and talk more about just kind of the facts of the book and why they're wrong. But I want to show you this next segment, and then we're going to talk about this from like a political perspective. But this next part, I just love it.
And you may drop this, but we won't.
Okay,
go ahead.
Thank you.
We won't. We have a lot more coming out.
Jerry Downing.
This latest contribution by David North, yet again he makes the claim that the issues that brought down Gerry Healy were unsubstantial issues.
Yes, they were. They were his personal life. He didn't rape anybody. He didn't sexually assault anybody. He had some consensual affairs. That has nothing to do with politics.
These weren't the real politics that we're really interested in. The sexual abuse of women.
No, the consensual affairs.
Over the decades that he participated in, the cover-up of these abuses. Well, that's not really politics, is it? That's nothing to do with politics. We're just good revolutionary people, and women's oppression.
Well, wait till you see where it goes next.
Well, that's just a secondary issue that serious political people just couldn't be bothered with. Why should we bother with such a thing? For Aidan Beattie's book, I don't agree with it all, but I do have to say that many of the points that are made are really quite substantial against David North and against the stuff that he does come out with. His WSWS site does produce some good substantial articles on many things that I follow quite closely. But the last thing I want to say is that I try to put forward the very well-known fact that the leader of the second revolution, Abraham Lincoln, was a racist, and that he came out with openly racist things. He said, for instance, that black people should never be made equal to white people. They shouldn't be allowed on juries. They shouldn't be allowed to vote. They shouldn't be allowed to marry white people, etc. And of course, you can't say that to David North, because he is a true American patriot who thinks that Abraham Lincoln was the real revolutionary, and of course they
greatest figures in world history.
Okay.
Yeah. So there at the end, right? They bait David North for defending Abraham Lincoln. We all know Abraham Lincoln said racist stuff. We all know that. But as the leader of the United States in the 1860s, he presided over the Second American Revolution that defeated slavery. I mean, he is responsible for the biggest social revolution that we've had in U.S. society, the overturning of the slaveocracy, right? Which is just a basic Marxist thing. Karl Marx wrote glowing things about Abraham Lincoln. I waved around on here the journalism of Karl Marx for the New York Tribune, but these people are so wokeified that, and this is what wokeism is, right? You don't care about politics. You don't care about anti-imperialism. You don't care about economics. You just care about sex and people's private lives. And on top of that, you're triggered. Oh my God, Abraham Lincoln, white man, you must be racist. It's like Abraham Lincoln to pull off what he did, to build that coalition that included Harriet Tubman and Frederick Douglass and build a mass movement to defeat the slaveocracy. I mean, Abraham Lincoln played a very, very, very positive role in American history, but God forbid that. I mean, and that just kind of shows you where this is coming from. This is wokeism, but there's so much now that you've seen that Zoom call. Now, I mean, you'll just see this is what we're dealing with, right? It's okay to praise AOC. It's okay to praise Bernie Sanders. It's okay to get money from Israel to write your smear book on an anti-Israel activist, but it's not okay to praise Abraham Lincoln, the leader of the Second American Revolution that defeated the slaveocracy and the British Empire. I mean, this level of this is how woke brain works, but we need to talk about it more. We need to talk about this more because I listened to what Aidan said, and that he's done some pretty mainstream interviews about this book. They've given him like a huge amount of attention in mainstream media, and it's interesting. They're really boosting it, and the Jacobin crew and all of that. But why? That's really what I started this stream with asking. Why? Gerry Healy died in 1992. It's 2024. Why did they write and distribute this book canceling a guy who died in 1992? Right? They destroyed his organization in 1985. He died in 1992. Why in the world are they still? It's like he's dead in the ground and they're still shooting his dead body. Why? Why is this happening? Because there are much deeper political issues, right? Let's look at that sentence again. My research in Britain was funded by the Program on Jewish Studies and the World History Center at the University of Pittsburgh, who were generous enough to see the Jewish and Israeli, Palestinian, and global connections of this project. What's going on here? What's going on here? Well, folks, I want to tell you, I told you that, when the front line of it, the party is always right. Right? That's George Orwell. That's Boxer the Horse. Yeah, he says it's a quote from Trotsky, but we all know what he's trying. The party is always right. Brainwashed thinking, blind obedience. We know what this is. And I have spent a huge amount of time on these live streams and in my books that I've written, in my book on Kamala Harris, in my book on City Builders and Vandals, and many places talking about the Congress for Cultural Freedom and the reinvention of leftist politics. Now, this Aidan guy who wrote this smear piece on Gerry Healy, he's a member of the Democratic Socialists of America, the DSA. And DSA is at this point the main socialist group in the United States. It's Bernie Sanders' group, it's AOC's group. And one of the founders of DSA is Gloria Steinem. And Gloria Steinem was the voice of feminism in America during the 1970s. And Gloria Steinem was also a CIA agent. And if you don't believe me, this is her talking about it.
Gloria, at the festival, you worked for the Independent Research Service.
That's right.
Well, exactly when did your own association with the CIA start, and in what fashion? Did they come to you, or did you go to them?
In 1958, when I came home from India, I discussed with student leaders, past and present, many of them active with the National Student Association, this kind of small foundation to encourage Americans to go. They thought it was a good idea, too. I was then told by foundations and professors and friends that I should not do this, that I would get in trouble with the House Un-American Activities Committee, the American Legion, all of those 50s people. And I became convinced that it was impossible. It was at that point that the student leaders said to me that they had in the past received funds for international programs from the CIA, and that they felt that this was important and could also be partly funded by the CIA.
Well, I mean, did you feel that you really tried? I mean, did you go around to all of the wealthy private foundations, wealthy private people, and explain your point of view and explain why you felt it was important that the United States be represented at these things in a certain way? What did they tell you?
They told me that, well, the Ford Foundation, for instance, told me that they thought we were too liberal and too controversial, and that we would endanger their cultural programs in Austria. I mean, the first festival was being held in Vienna. It was not encouraging at all, and the private individuals to whom I went often had particular points of view to put forward, which would have been much, much more restricting than the CIA funds were, which were free. I mean, no one was told what to say.
Yeah, that's the founder of DSA, founding member of DSA on their national board, Gloria Steinem, openly admitting that she's funded by the CIA. And go and read her autobiography. In her autobiography, she says that she's worked with the CIA over the years, and that they're a very open-minded and liberal pacifist organization. I mean, this is, and I'm sure that, Aiden, all they have to do is cut to him. These are conspiracy theories. These are crazy conspiracy theories. And that's how they are, right? Right? If mainstream media says it, it can be bull honky and completely false. Like, somehow Russia is responsible for rigging the elections and making Trump win. Well, that's totally legit. But we've got the founder of DSA admitting on video that she got funded by the CIA, right? And in her autobiography, she goes into more detail about it and describes her work with the CIA. And Jacobin, their official tax documents, as revealed by Ben Norton, admit they're funded by the Jewish Communal Fund, which is a Zionist pro-Israel entity. And he brags that his book, was funded by Zionist institutions, and his work over the years has been funded by various Zionist institutions. But these are conspiracy theories. But what's going on here? What's going on here? I'll just tell you, right? There's a narrative in this book that has a lot more implications than just for Gerry Healy, right? It's about a lot more than one guy. Basically, if you read this book, which I went through it earlier tonight, Gerry Healy is Hitler, right? He's Hitler, right? He's a rabble rouser. He's a megalomaniac. He loves violence and he hates the Jews, and he's building this mass movement. And Gerry Healy is Hitler. That's basically what the book says. That Gerry Healy is a potential Hitler. And that's what we've got to watch out for, is these mass movements. And, the Congress for Cultural Freedom, the CIA's program where they reinvented leftism, it created a number of well-known intellectuals, leftist intellectuals, one of whom was Susan Sontag. And Susan Sontag, she famously said, communism is nothing but the most effective form of fascism. And in addition to that, who else did they fund and promote? Hannah Arendt, who wrote her book, Eichmann in Jerusalem. And the book Eichmann in Jerusalem by Hannah Arendt is all about how this Nazi war criminal, mass murderer, Adolf Eichmann, who fled to Argentina, was arrested by Israel and was brought to Israel and received the death penalty, how Adolf Eichmann was just an ordinary guy. He was in the YMCA before he joined the Nazis, and that shows that the quote, the banality of evil, that deep down normal ordinary people are all just a bunch of Nazis. And that that's why you need Israel, because all the Jews have to be protected from working class people, the working class, the broad masses of people of the world. If they get together and form mass movements, they might follow some guy like Gerry Healy, and next thing you know, the Holocaust is happening again. Right? That's their narrative. Communism and fascism, in their view, is the same thing. And they're both a result of too much democracy, of mass popular movements. If we, the sheep, if the sheep, the inferior rabble, if we get together and start fighting for our rights, we turn into Nazis and bloodthirsty, mass murdering Hitlers. And that's why you need Israel. And that's why leftist politics, you can't ever talk about economic issues. No, that's class reductionism. You can't talk about that. That's why we've always got to be looking for some minority, right? You know, I mean, if it's not an ethnic minority, it's a sexual minority. We're fighting for the trans people. We're fighting for the pansexuals. We're fighting for the people with disability. They're always looking for some oppressed minority that they can line up with, so the masses can be the enemy. What did Karl Marx say in the Communist Manifesto? He said, all previous political movements have been movements of minorities, but we fight on behalf of the immense majority, right? That we're building a movement for all humanity against the wealthy minority that controls the banks, factories, and industries, the centers of economic power, the big monopolies, the imperialists. We're fighting on behalf of the majority. But the Susan Sontag, Gloria Steinem, Congress for Cultural Freedom left, they hate the majority, and they always want to find some minority that they can become the champions of and justify oppressing the the vast minority. It is about demonizing the bulk of humanity. It is about elitism, thinking that they are superior, thinking that deep down ordinary people are evil, and that guys like Gerry Healy, who fire up the masses of people to demand, to organize mass rallies for the right to jobs, who stand with leaders like Gaddafi, who raised their country out of poverty, they are the main threat, right? This is what it really gets down to, right? And this is the narrative that you get from the neoconservative book, Persecution and the Art of Writing. Leo Strauss, the intellectual godfather of neoconservatism. He had the exact same message. He wrote Persecution and the Art of Writing, arguing that all the great philosophers of history had to write in code because the masses of people would persecute them if they knew what they truly thought, right? And that this is the standard narrative that we get, right? And this is exacerbated in the age of Netflix, right? Netflix is obsessed with cults. Did you know that if you join any mass movement, it's a cult, right? It's a political cult. You know, if you join a mass movement, if you organize and try to resist, and then it's a cult, right? It's a cult, right? And that we just need you to be isolated at home. Don't trust anybody. Don't trust anybody. Just let us program your mind with Netflix and social media. Let the algorithms run your mind. Don't join an organization. Don't build an actual movement, especially not a movement that stands with leaders like Gaddafi, or stands with the Russian people against American imperialism, or stands with China, or stands with Cuba or Venezuela. Instead, just celebrate nonconformity, celebrate ugliness, and demonize beauty, right? You got Jackson Pollock smearing paint on a canvas. Beauty is fascist. Athletic strength is fascist. Fighting for a just cause, believing that right and wrong exist, that's fascist, right? And that we need to enter this kind of pessimistic place where we hide from humanity, where we don't join a mass movement, where we don't stand for justice, where we don't believe in truth or right and wrong, and we view the masses of people as the enemy. This is the party line in America. This is the party line, right? There's a reason. ContraPoints, she had a video, and the video turned into just her going over Nietzsche's essay, Beyond Good and Evil. Why? I mean, it was supposed to be a critique of Christianity or whatever. She could have invoked Karl Kautsky and his great book, The Foundations of Christianity, explaining Christianity and from a class perspective in the context of ancient Rome and all that. No. She goes to Nietzsche's Beyond Good and Evil, which is a similar narrative. The Übermensch are oppressed by the mob, the inferior ones. This is what they believe. This is called philosophical irrationalism. And it was very well debunked by by the writer, the Marxist intellectual George Lukács, right? And Lukács got into it, that it is this belief that truth does not exist, that the world is defined by chaos, not reason, that an attempt to define reality and say that there is actually a reality is totalitarian, and that great individuals, non-conforming individuals, can just kind of impose their will on the world around them. This is, when it really gets down to it, this is the ideology of the ruling class, and demonizing guys like Gerry Healy, who built anti-imperialist mass movements to stand with the Palestinians, who, he criticizes him, for not joining the liberal pacifist hippie anti-Vietnam War movement, instead trying to build a class-based anti-imperialist movement, right? They are the enemy in this narrative, right? This is what leftism has come to mean. And they accuse anything that doesn't join this kind of woke, whatever you want to call it, woke cancel culture, pessimistic degrowth movement. They accuse anything that doesn't join that and doesn't, echo the talking points. They accuse that of being Nazi and fascist, right? I was a member of Workers' World Party for 8 years. Now we have the Center for Political Innovation, and we've been called Nazis and fascists, and we've gotten the Gerry Healy treatment from day one. We're Nazis and fascists. I'm supposed to be a narcissist, all this stuff, right? I'm anti-Semitic, right? When I talk about imperialism and the role of finance capital, that's secretly code for Jew. That's what they tell us. When we talk about building mass movements, it secretly means kill all the Jews, right? This is the standard playbook that they use against anti-imperialist voices. This is the way these things operate. We're not anti-Semitic here. We don't hate Jewish people. We don't hate anybody on the basis of their ethnicity. And we certainly don't think that one ethnic group or one religious group is the problem, right? It's obviously systems that are the problem. I think it was said by Auguste Babel that anti-Semitism is socialism for fools. And that when it really gets down to it, though, we are in a period where socialism, communism, Marxism, the history of anti-imperialism, these are it's illiberalism, right? And that we want to build mass movements that stand for right and wrong and stand for truth. And because of that, they're going to label us Nazis and fascists. So I wanted to talk about, this is, Gerry Healy. It's very important to David North, and I commend him and the World Socialist website for standing up, around this issue and speaking up around it. And it's important to him because it's part of his political heritage, but it's also very important to the imperialists. It's important to them because they know that we're in a period that's ripe to build a mass movement, right? That's ripe to build a mass movement because imperialism is collapsing because of the falling rate of profit and because of the problem of technology creating economic crisis in our irrational system. And they're very afraid of any mass movement that might arise. And so they're employing the same tactics, the sexual innuendo, he's a narcissist, it's a cult. They're trying to employ the same methods, and they're trying to do that to prevent any real mass movement from arising. So there we go. We have to oppose that. We want a government of action that fights for working families. That's what we want. We want to have this country reborn on new foundations. We want to join the new economy that's rising around the world. That's what we want. And in order to do that, we have to build an organization. We have to build a group. And that's why we're so dedicated to doing it. That's kind of where things currently stand. And that's why Gerry Healy is so important, right? You know, I mean, it seems like completely unrelated. It's this guy who died 35 years ago, but it's important to them because they know something like the movement that he built in Britain is likely to pop up again amid this crisis of capitalism, and they want to stop it. And that's why they're inoculating their audience and they're inoculating people in the United States against such a thing. So I don't know. I mean, I felt like, again, this is kind of an obscure topic. This is kind of inside baseball, but it's important. It's important to see. I want you to see what they're doing, because if you look at a lot of things that have happened over the past few years, you know, it's the same stuff over and over and over again. The same old story, right? The same old story, the same old narratives. It's the same old story. And we have got to keep going, and we've got to learn how our enemy operates, how the imperialists and the Zionists operate. And we got to figure out how we can build the working class movement, the movement to build a new America for working families that is desperately needed in this country. And we urgently need to figure that out. And we're wrangling with it every day. The Center for Political Innovation is marching ahead.